we're in Parshas Bereishis. You should have a handout, which is a Ramban, the Art Scroll Ramban, which is Hebrew English. What we're going to be looking at first, last week we looked at the first two psukim. And before we go back to the first two psukim, as we always do when we start Bereishis, we did it when we did Parshas Bereishis several weeks ago. Now we're learning Bereishis as the Parsha. This week is obviously Parshas Vayera, but we're studying Parshas Bereishis and creation. The first Rashi in the Torah, Amar Bereishis, in the beginning. Rashi writes Dibra Hamaskos. A Dibra Hamaskos means Rashi selected the words that he's going to write his commentary on. And this is an important way to understand Rashi. When Rashi says something, he's saying something to explain the words that begin the Rashi. So usually in your Chumash print, you will have the bold, you will have the words of the Torah in bold, and then after that, you will have the Rashi in Rashi script. The words that Rashi selected that need to be explained are what we call the Dibur Hamaschil, the introductory words. Those words come from the pasuk itself, and Rashi comments on the pasuk. So it's important when we learn Rashi to see what words in this pasuk Rashi wanted to explain. Second rule about Rashi that we need to know, Rashi says all over Chumash that ani lo basi el lefarish pshutoi shel mikra. My purpose, Rashi says, is only to come and explain the simple understanding of the pasuk. Meaning, there on any given pasuk, we know there's Medrash Rabbah, there's Medrash Tanchuma, there are other Medrashim, there's Gemaras that have drushes. Rashi says, my purpose in writing this Pirush is to give a person the ability to learn Chumash al pi pshuta shel mikra, the basic understanding of a pasuk. There's what's been called Pardes. Pardes is sort of a garden, a tree garden. And the word Pardes, Pei, Reish, Dalet, Samach, stands for the four basic ways a pasuk or a word can be understood. Pei stands for Pshat, Reish stands for Remez, Dalet stands for Drush, and Samach stands for Sod. You can look at a pasuk and you have Pshuta Shel Mikra. What does this pasuk mean? When I say what does this pasuk mean, I'm not talking about Chas v'Shalom Tzedukim or Karoyim. I'm not talking about looking at a pasuk and saying, well, the pasuk says, Lo Savaru Eish B'chol Mosh Voseichem B'yom HaShabbos. A pasuk in Vayakel that says, you shall not burn a fire wherever you live on Shabbos. Okay, so that means you can't have fire in your house. So the Tzedukim who did not believe in Torah Shebal Peh, the Torah that the Rebbeinu Shalom transmitted to Moshe to understand every pasuk and every word and every letter of the Torah, they don't believe in that. They only believe in the written word. So they say, it says you can't have a fire on your house on Shabbos. Therefore, the Tzedukim sat in the dark the entire Shabbos. They did not light candles in their homes because you're not allowed to have a fire in your house. Or in the Parsha of Tzitzis, it says, Ure'isem oisoi, and you shall see your tzitzis. So what the Tzedukim did was, they made tzitzis, however they made it. I don't know how they made it since they didn't have Torah Shebal Peh, but whatever they did, fringes, strings, whatever they did, and they hung them on the walls all over their homes. Because the Torah says, Ure'isem oso, you need to see it. To need to see it, I'm going to hang it up all over my house. So when I say pshuta shel mikra, I'm not talking about the literal meaning of the pasuk and then just follow it without the Torah Shabbal Peh. We don't do that. Pshuta shel mikra, Rashi is saying, now we have a way to sort of compare it. Pardes, there's Pshuta shel mikra, Remez. The Torah in its words, its letters, the combination of words and letters has certain remozim. It is hinting at certain things. Rashi says, I'm not going to tell you the remozim. We're not into remozim in Rashi. Drush, there's a whole chelik of Torah Shabbal Peh that are drushim in the pasuk. And that can be agadita drushim. It could be halachat drushim. Some of these halachat drushim are necessary to understand the pasuk. But the drushes, quote unquote, their fancy English words for drash, which I don't like to use because I don't think they fully tell us what drash is. We know what drash is. The Rav says a drasha. The pasuk can be interpreted this way as well. The word can have two meanings, and when we put the two meanings together, this is the new idea that comes from the pasuk. Those are all very nice if done properly. That's not what Rashi is doing. Sod is Kabbalah, the secrets of the Torah. Rashi is not going to talk about the Kabbalah or the secrets of the Torah. The Ramban does. We learned in Akdama to the Ramban al Torah that he says, I will be talking about these things, and when I get to these things, I will introduce them to you with certain words, and that means you are not to learn that Ramban unless you have a Rebbe who can transmit to you the true meaning of Kabbalah. So Rashi is telling us, Ani loy basi elafarish pshuta shel mikra. My job here is for you to read the pasuk and understand the pasuk on its basic level according to Torah Shabbal Peh, without remez, drush, or sod. Okay. Therefore, when we come to a Rashi, as we will maybe today or next week, and Rashi says, Ein ha-mikra hazeh oime ele darshuni, this pasuk is screaming out and saying, I need a drasha. Rashi will say that. Ein ha-mikra hazeh oime ele darshuni, darshuni drash. This pasuk doesn't have a pshat to it, and it's screaming out for the drasha. When Rashi does that, he'll introduce you to the drasha that is found in Chazal. Other than that, we need to remember the rule that when Rashi is writing his pshat, he's writing pshuta shel mikra, not remez, not drush, not soy. We have to also remember to look at the dibur hamaschil. What word or words in the pasuk did Rashi decide deserve comment? There's a whole sefer today. I forgot the exact name of the sefer. They translated it into English. And I think in English, the sefer is called What Was Bothering Rashi? Mahaya Koshelo Rashi. For every Rashi that's written, Rashi is coming to explain something in the pasuk that he found difficult and therefore wanted to explain it al pi pshuta. So what was bothering Rashi? So now let's start with the first Rashi, which we've learned many, many, many times over the years. But this is the introduction, the first Rashi al Torah. What word did Rashi pick that needs its explanation? Bereishis. Rashi didn't write Bereishis bara or Bereishis bara Elokim. Rashi selected the word Bereishis. Amar Reb Yitzchak. What is this word Bereishis about? Reb Yitzchak said, this is a medrash, Lo yitzorach lahaschel es haTorah ela me'achodesh hazeh lachem shi mitzvah rishona shenetztavu bo Yisrael. The Torah l'chayra are commandments. I want to know what God wants me to do so that I can be an Oived Hashem. That's what we talk about in the Das Tvunos the last few days. How do you become an Oived Hashem? What do I need to do? I need to take my neshama and let my neshama work over the guf, lift up my existence so that it's higher than the guf neshama conflict, and through that I lift up the entire world. The tools that I have to lift myself up and lift up the entire world are Torah mitzvahs. Okay. If that's the case, so can we get to it? Instead of getting to the first mitzvah in the Torah that Moshe commanded us, which is HaChodesh HaZelachem, in Pashas Bo, in the middle of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, right before the Jews leave on the 15th of Nisan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar, and the first month of the lunar calendar is Nisan. HaChodesh HaZelachem. This new month is yours. This is how you calculate months. And therefore, when we want to talk about Rosh Hashanah, the Torah doesn't talk about Tishrei. The Torah talks about B'chodesh Hashvi'i Be'echad L'chodesh, the seventh month, first day. The Torah counts the months from Nisan. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei. Tishrei is the seventh month. We don't have Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev in the Torah. Tishrei, Cheshvan, and Kislev, Yerushalmi tells us in Rosh Hashanah, Olu mi Bavel. These are names that the Jews learned when they were in the exile in Bavel. They brought it back with them to Eretz Yisrael. And lo and behold, the Jewish people adopted those quote-unquote Babylonian names. And we say Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, Adar, etc. Why are we using Babylonian names? Ramban talks about it in Parshas Bo. But the Torah doesn't have Tishrei Cheshvan. It goes by numbers. So the first mitzvah in the Torah is in Parshas Bo, HaChodesh HaZelachem. So the Torah should start, it's the book of commandments, Vaydav Hashem HaMoshe V'Aaron Lebar, HaChodesh HaZelachem. The first mitzvah. Why does the Torah start with the word Bereishis, in the beginning? And in the word Bereishis, Rashi is now asking on this whole idea of Bereishis. Why do I need the Torah to give me the story of what happened at the beginning? Rashi is defining the word Bereishis. In the beginning, this is what the world looked like. Or in the beginning, God created such and such. Two ways to learn the pasuk, Rashi and Ramban, which we'll get to. But Rashi is asking that question. Bereishis, in the beginning, God wants to tell us what everything looked like and how he created the world in the beginning. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, why do I need this whole Bereishis and this whole story? That's all I want to get to is the mitzvahs. Okay. So this kasha is not just a kasha on the word Bereishis, it's a kasha on the whole idea of Bereishis. In the beginning, this is what happened. And the kasha continues through Pashas Noah. What do I need to know about Noach and the Mabel? And it continues through Pashas Vayera, Lech Lecha, Vayera. All of these stories are very nice. They could have been in the Medrash Rabbah that were passed on from generation to generation. There are thousands of stories in the Medrash Rabbah that got passed on to generation and then got put into the Medrash Rabbah. And the story of Avram's Lech Lecha, and the story of the destruction of Stone, and the story of the selling of Yosef by his brothers, and the story of Mitzrayim could have all been a medrash. And the Torah, Achamisha Chumshei Torah, starts Vaydav Hashem Moshe V'Aaron Lebar, the first mitzvah HaChodesh HaZelachem. So this kasha is Bereishis, but the whole idea of Bereishis, which means the Torah, the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to tell me stories, the stories that go along with Bereishis, creation, Adam, Chava, Noach, Avram, Sarah, etc. All of that is included in this idea of Bereishis, that I need to tell you all these stories. Why do I need all these stories for? What purpose? Start the mitzvahs. So Rabbi Yitzchak answered, Umatam pasach beBereishis, Mishum kach masav higid la'amo losis lahem nachlas kohen. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Koyach masav higid la'amo. The might of his deeds, God wanted to teach his nation. God wanted to teach us how mighty he is, meaning how he is the sovereign over all creation. Because he wanted to give us the inheritance that first started, or the land that first started as Goyim land. It was Eretz Canaan. It was the land in which Canaan lived. Canaan was the son of Chum. we are, as Jews, descendants of Shem. Ham, son, was Canaan, and that's why it's called Eretz Canaan. There's a whole machlokes how Canaan got here and how we got it. It's machlokes. Ramban talks about it, Rashi talks about it, but the point is, the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Kayach masav higid la'amai." The Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to teach us that He is the ultimate sovereign, He is the ultimate mighty power, so that we would understand that He can cut up the world and give out, He can carve up the world and give it out to whoever He wants. Now, why is that important? Remember, keep your eyeball on the question. This is a very important thing to remember when you're learning Torah, and some when you're learning. People ask a question and they deflect. And people have gotten used to not getting answers to their questions. I'm not talking now about the Jewish thing that they say Jews answer a question with a question. I'm talking about now complete deflection. The world outside, politics, news conferences, people are asked a question about X and they say X is very important. I'd like to talk about A. I didn't ask you about A. I asked you about X. So you said, yes, X is quite an important issue, and I'd like to get more back into A. I didn't ask you about A. So it's constant. People have books in front of them at press conferences. You ask them a question, they flip to the page and they read a narrative. Otherwise, they deflect to go to somewhere else. When you're learning Torah, or when you're listening to someone and you ask a question, you have to listen carefully if the question you asked is being answered or you're the victim of deflection. So what's the question here? Start me off with what? Start me off with mitzvahs. I don't need Bereishis and all the stories that flow from Bereishis. Just give me a mitzvah. Answers Reb Yitzchak. It's important to have Bereishis and all the stories that flow after it, so that we understand that God created the world. He's the master of the world. He's the sovereign of the world. He carved up the world, and He gave us Eretz Canaan. Is that have we answered the question? Absolutely not. If we don't delve further into Rashi, we have no answer to the question. The question was, I don't want stories. I want the first mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Answer, I want to teach you that God's the sovereign, and He carved up the world the way He wanted it, and He gave Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. That's a very nice concept. It's beautiful. God's the master of the world. He's the sovereign of the world. He decided that Jews would get Eretz Yisrael forever. Very nice. But my question is, that's a story again. Give me the first mitzvah. Okay, so we haven't answered the question. Continuing Rashi. If the nations of the world will come and say to us, you are robbers, listen, you conquered the the land of 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael. It's not your land. Get out. Heim omim lahem, the Jewish people answer them. Kol ha'oretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bereishis bar Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. God created heaven and earth. He's the master of the universe. He's the creator of the universe. Hu bara v'nosnal asher yasher be'enav. And God carved up the earth and gave it out to the nations as He pleases because He owns it. V'tzona natan lahem. At His will it was given to the Canaanites. Uv'tzona natan lahem v'nosnal. And in His will, He decided to take it away from the Canaanites and to give it to the Jewish people through Avraham Avinu, ad olam, forever. That's the Rashi. I still don't have an answer to my question. Can you please tell me the first mitzvah? The Torah l'cha'ira is the book of mitzvahs. Remember when we learned the Hakdama to the Ramban al HaTorah several weeks ago, the Ramban said that the word Torah means we always think about Torah as a mitzvah. We want to know about how to bring a carbon. Torah tells us how to put on tzitzis. And the Ramban says, let me get the exact quote from the Ramban. The Ramban quotes a pasuk, "Ve'etnu lachem es luchos habris v'aTorah v'amitzvah." The Rebbeinu Shalom said, I will give you the luchos, I will give you the Torah, I will give you the mitzvah. And the Ramban says, what do each of these words mean? We know what the luchos are. The Ramban says, "Im kein haTorah," the word Torah, yichlal hasipurim metchilas Bereishis. The word Torah in that pasuk means the stories from the beginning of Bereishis. Ki hu moira anoshim b'derech be'inyan ha'emunah. These stories teach people how to have emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Creator and the administrator and supervisor of the world. It teaches us emunah. So the word Torah for the Ramban means the sipurim that occur from Bereishis and onwards. Rabbi Yitzchak is asking something slightly different. However you want to define the word Torah, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah are meant for mitzvahs. Start off with the first mitzvah. Why? With Bereishis and all the stories that flow from Bereishis. Answer: because you need to know that God created the world. He controls the world. It's his world. He gave Eretz Canaan to the Canaanites. Then when he saw fit, he took it away from them. He gave it to Avram and said, this is yours forever. He never said that to. He gave it to the Canaanites, and then he gave it to Avram forever. What is the answer? Why is this a mitzvah? So how do you answer the kasha, Rabbi Yisai? Kasha is, start me with a mitzvah, the whole Torah. Just start with the mitzvahs, one after another. Why do I have a whole Chumash Bereishis? And the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, just give me mitzvahs. The answer is, I need to know God created the world, and he gave us Eretz Yisrael forever. How does that answer the question? And the answer is, the answer is in the question, as many answers are. It lies in the question. The reason why we need to know all these things is because Eretz Yisrael is the place where the Torah comes alive and is the place where mitzvahs are meant to be done. That's a whole Ramban Shita that we talk about many times, that the Iker place of Kiyum HaMitzvahs is in Eretz Yisrael. And that includes, now when we talk about Shemitah, then we talk about Trum, we say, oh, that can only be done in Eretz Yisrael. When we talk about Tzitzis and Tefillin, we say, oh, that could be done anywhere in the world. The Ramban teaches us that even mitzvahs like Tzitzis and Tefillin and Shabbos, the Ikar place of Kiyum mitzvahs is Dafke in Eretz Yisrael. And that's where the Torah comes alive. It comes alive, it lives, it's the living Torah in Eretz Yisrael. And the Ramban, and we read this in Parshas Ekev, Rashi tells us in the Parsha of Ahoyim Shema, the second Parsha of Kriya Shema, that the mitzvahs that are done in Chutz La'aretz are because of Hatziv L'chat Tziyonim. You have to keep markers for yourself, so that Mi'etz Hashem, when you come back from Golus, if the Torah Chas v'Shalom was written in such a way that you don't have to put on tzitzis and tefillin and Chutz La'aretz, then after 2,000 years in Golus, Mashiach comes, he comes back, and he tells everybody, we're going to build a Beis HaMikdash, and there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews that say, what is a Beis HaMikdash, and what is this tefillin, and what are these tzitzis? We haven't heard about these things for 2,000 years. So to avoid that whole geschäft, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, even if you're in Chutz La'aretz, put on your tefillin. Even if you're in Chutz La'aretz, put on your tzitzis. This is Rashi talking in Parshas Ekev. The Ramban explains that further. The Ikka place to be Makayim mitzvahs is in Eretz Yisrael. So now you have a very good understanding of Rashi. Why do I need the whole story of creation? Just give me mitzvahs. But in order to give you mitzvahs, you need to understand where geographically the mitzvahs need to be done. And the mitzvahs need to be done in Eretz Yisrael. Why do they have to be done in Eretz Yisrael? Because Eretz Yisrael was given to you forever, and that's the place of Kiyum mitzvahs. How do I know it was given to me forever? But the Goyim say I stole it. Bereishis, and all the stories that flow until the first mitzvah of Chodesh is Elochem, so that we understand clearly that God created heaven and earth. It's His world. He gave Eretz Yisrael to us through Avraham Avinu forever, and this is the Ikar place of Kiyum Mitzvahs HaTorah. So before we get to any mitzvah, the Rebbeinu Shalom tells us, I want to explain to you the location of the mitzvahs. I'm going to give you a Waze, W-A-Z-E. We're going to give you a Waze so that you can find your geographic location. Where do I do all these mitzvahs? You do them in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Bereishis Bar Kim, and I gave it to you forever. But the Goyim keep on telling me I stole it. You didn't steal it. I created the world, and I gave it to you. Okay, so that's the basic question and the basic answer. Let's go to the second Rashi. The second Rashi is what I spoke about several moments ago. Bereishis Bora. Ein hamikra hazeh oime ela darsheni. It just took the second Rashi in the Torah to say what I said. The pasuk is screaming out for a drasha because the pshuta shel mikra doesn't have a pshat. Now look at the Dibur Hamaschil, the second Rashi. What did Rashi write in? What words is he explaining? The first Rashi wrote Bereishis. I just want to explain the word Bereishis because Bereishis is the introductory word to in the beginning of creation and all the stories that go into Bereishis. And why do I need all these stories? V'chulu v'chulu. Broad question. The second Rashi wrote, I want to explain two words, Bereishis, Bora. And we're going to see why Rashi picked two words. This is a difficult phrase, Bereishis, Bora. And Rashi's going to explain why. And that's why Rashi begins by saying, Ein hamikra hazeh oime ela darsheni. If you want to understand this pasuk, al pi pshuto shel mikra, just understanding the pasuk lefi pshat, simple pshat, I can't explain it to you, Rashi says. Why? Because there are diktuk problems, which we won't get into. Rashi explains them. But Rashi explains that if you're going to interpret the word Bereishis, Bora, as being some kind of introduction to a chronological order of creation, Bereishis Bora l'kim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. In other words, the first thing God created was heaven. And the second thing God created was earth. And then God created the light. If that's how you're going to understand the pasuk, that we're dealing here with a chronological order, Rashi says we have major problems. For example, pasuk Beis, Rashi comments. I'm just speaking out the Rashi before we get to the teretz. Pasuk Beis, v'ha'aretz ha'isa sayu v'avoyu. The land was desolate. The land, whatever the land means, the universe was desolate. V'choshech al pnei sahom, and there was darkness on the water, the deep water. V'ruach halakim rachevez al pnei hamayim. Now, all these words have different meanings. Lineda, we're going to get into it through the Ramban. What does toihu mean? What does boihu mean? What is choshech? What is tahoim? But for right now, let us read the pasuk the way we used to read it in elementary school. In Anfang hat der Rebbeinu Shalom bashafen the Himmel and the air. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, first thing that He creates is heaven. Second thing He creates is earth. So ding, 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 ding. God's spirit, whatever that is hovering over the water. Where did water come from? Who created water? It doesn't say anything about water. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And now I'm talking about water in the second pasuk. Who created water? So Rashi has diktuk problems, which I'm not talking out. And Rashi also has this problem, if it's chronological order, At what point was water created? So therefore, Rashi, because of these, then Rashi comments and says, Shamayim, we know, is made out of Aish and Mayim. It's a combination of fire and water. That's why it's called Shamayim. In the beginning, God created Shamayim, which is Aish Umayim. Well, when did he create the fire and when did he create the water? You need those two things if that's what Shamayim is made up of. So Rashi rejects the idea for now that this is a chronological order, and therefore Rashi says, although Rashi is saying, my job is to give you pshat, this pasuk is screaming for a drasha. As the Chachamim tell us, B'shvil ha-Torah shenikras reishis darkoi, u'b'shvil Yisrael shenikru reishis tevuasa. A drasha, something that we didn't hear when we were learning these psukim in early elementary school before we did Rashi, and even after we did Rashi. I'm not sure that we all understood the effect that Rashi has on this pasuk. Rashi says that I can't give you a pshuta shel mikra. There's a diktuk problem here between the word Bereishis and Bora. If it was a chronological order, it would say Bereishis Baro, would say other things, or maybe it is a chronological order and it should say something. There are diktuk problems here. Beyond that, there's where did the water come from? Where did the fire come from? So Rashi says, I'm going to a drasha. And this is what the pasuk now means. In different psukim, in Nevi'im, Ksuvim, the Torah is called Bereishis. The Torah is called like the beginning of all beginnings. Bereishis Darko. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. The Jewish people are also called in Yirmiyah Bereishis Tevuasa. We are the God's first grain. Whatever the psukim mean in their context is irrelevant right now. The point is that the Jewish people are called Bereishis by God. We are his Bereishis. The Torah is also called Bereishis by God. Therefore, Rashi says, according to the drasha means Bereishis. Because of Reishis, it's almost as if the Bay stands for Bishvil, or others would interpret the Bays as being two. Bays equals the number two. Bays Reishis, because of two beginnings. God created the heaven and earth because Bishvil Reishis, or Bays Reishis, because of the two Reishises. God created heaven and earth. So what does the pasuk now mean? Because of the Jewish people who are Bereishis, and because of the Torah that's Bereishis, God created heaven and earth. So the whole world was created for the Jewish people and for the Torah. That's Rashi's drasha, which of course he gets from the Medrash, but he says that this is my introduction to the explanation of Bereishis, because the pshat gives me difficulties in terms of diktuk and in terms of lack of chronological order. Therefore, I'm going to turn to the drasha. Therefore, the drasha is because of two Reishises, Torah and the Klal Yisrael, God created heaven and earth because of and for the Jewish people, and because of and for the Torah. Then Rashi says, if you want to try to stretch and force pshat into this pasuk, we're going to have to do some things. This is how you would have to explain it. Bereishis, Beria Shemayim v'Aretz v'Aretz Eitzosoyim v'Voyu v'Chosh v'Yom Elohim Yiyar v'Loi Boha Mikra L'Hoida Seder HaBriya v'Loima She'elu Kadmu. That Rashi goes away from completely. There's no chronological order. Obviously, according to the drasha, we're not even talking about what was created first or second. According to the drasha, we're saying the world that was created for Torah and for Klal Yisrael, each of which are called Bereishis. Now Rashi says, I'm going to give you a pshat, but it's still not going to be chronological order. You cannot get chronological order into this pasuk according to the Rashi. Rashi says, then you have to explain the word bara, not meaning Bereishis bara, in the beginning God created, but you have to understand the word to mean bara brias. Bereishis brias hashamayim v'sa'aretz. In the beginning, when God was in the act of creation. So instead of Bereishis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, it's in the beginning when God was in the process of creating heaven and earth. As we mentioned last week, this is sort of lahavda, like a novel. Novel opens up. It was the 22nd day of December. It was a dark evening in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Peter was crossing the street. It was a rainy night. There was no moon outline, and from out of nowhere, a dark Chevrolet came out, etc., etc. And that becomes the background, and now you move into the story. That early depiction of Milwaukee and the night and rain is just to give you a setting, a background of where the story is now headed. So Rashi says, if you want a pashup shot, rather than the drasha of God created the heavens and earth for two reasons, Jewish people and Torah, then we're going to have to say the word bara doesn't mean in the beginning when God created. Bereishis bara is going to mean Bereishis brias, in the beginning when God was in the act of creation, creating heaven and earth, and it's a background. And this is how you read the psukim according to Rashi. Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. In the beginning when God was in the act of creating heavens and earth. Background information. In the beginning, when God was in the process of creating, Oretz looked like Tohu v'Vohu v'Choshech al Pnei Sahom v'Ruach Elokim Racheves al Pnei Hamayim, and in that setting, lahavdil, and in that Milwaukee evening, the car came out of nowhere. In that setting of Choshech, Tohu, Vohu, Vayom Elokim Yehi Or, and God said, "Let there be light." That's the drasha, and that's the pshat according to Rashi. One, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, drasha. Bereishis means Torah, and Bereishis means Klal Yisrael, and that's a drasha. God created heaven and earth for the Torah and for Klal Yisrael. And if you want to stick to really Pshuto Shal Mikra, Rashi says, we're going to have to try to work into the word bara, not in the beginning created heaven and earth, because that would be a chronological order, and that's not accurate according to Rashi, because we already have fire and water. Therefore, we're going to define it as Bereishis brias, in the beginning when God was in the act of creation. What did the place look like? Tayu, vayu, chayshech, and in that setting, vayom Elokim Yehi Or. God said, "Let there be light." Okay. Now, that means, according to Rashi, there's all kinds of things that existed before God said, "Let there be light." There was water, there was some kind of fire. All these things pre-existed the light. But this pasuk is not a chronological order. In the beginning, when God was in the act of creating heaven and earth, he said, "Yehi Or." But there's a whole bunch of things that existed before the Or. That's Rashi's drasha. That's Rashi's Pshutai Shel Mikra. Let's take a look we started late today because of our technical problems. Let's take a look for a minute at the handout, the Ramban. The Ramban, the first page of the Ramban in the top left-hand corner shows page 23. That's what we're going to read. This is the Art Scroll Ramban with English translation. The Ramban first quotes Rashi, as he does in almost every instance. Before the Ramban goes off and offers another pshat, out of covet for Rashi, he'll bring down Rashi's pshat. He will either have questions on it and therefore will give a different pshat, or he will say that there's a machlekes in the Medrash, or there's a machlekes in the Gemara, and there's a second shita. But with a rare exception, the Ramban doesn't just open up and say, Oh, this is what I think. He will be choylek kavod l'Rashi and quote Rashi. Okay, so the Ramban says, V'ata shma perish hamikra al pshutai nachon ubarur. Now, please listen to me, the Ramban says, to the interpretation of this pasuk according to its simple meaning. The Ramban's going to tell you, I'm going to give you a pshuta shel mikra, and I'm going to avoid the Rashi problem of what do you do with water, what do you do with fire. I'm going to show you that the pasuk indeed goes in chronological order as it's written. Rashi rejected chronological order for the reasons we mentioned, and therefore he had a drasha and he had a different shot. The Ramban says, listen, I'm going to tell you pshuta shel mikra in a clear manner. And this clear manner is going to allow you to understand Bereishis bara Elokim in a chronological order. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanefroyim me'afisa muchletes. Thank you, Rabbi and Mr. Samet, for sharing the file. I know that the scan of the Ramban was sent out by Shmuel. We thank him again for this. The scan was sent out. Some people apparently are having problems getting the scans. Please work that out with Shmuel. Send him an email. Everybody should have his email address. I don't know why everyone is not getting, but it seems that the vast majority of people are getting the scan. Okay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanefroyim me'afisa muchletes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created all creations from absolute nihility. Okay? This is Yesoid Yesoidis v'omer HaChochmes, Rambam's opening lashon. I'm just using it for my own purposes now. This is a foundational principle in understanding and in our belief system. Everything was created from nothing. We'll see how the Ramban explains that. The world, when we say what was here before the world, before the world was absolutely nothing, only the Ribono Shel Olam. And the Ribono Shel Olam created yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. This is completely contrary to Greek philosophers who held and promulgated the idea that there was olam kadmon, kadmus ha'olam. There were some things here that God found, like a good artist came into a room and he found some Crayolas and he drew a beautiful picture. Now the artist gets full credit for the beautiful picture, but the fact of the matter is he needed some supplies to get it done. That is absolute kfira in the Ribono Shel Olam. We learned about this in the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva before Rosh Hashanah and during the Aseret Yimei Tshuva. We absolutely believe the world was created yesh me'ayin. The Ribono Shel Olam didn't find some Crayolas and made a beautiful world. There was nothing here. He had to create the world, which started at zero. Nothing. There's nothing here. Ve'ein etzleinu b'lashon hakodesh b'hitzos hayesh me'ayin elo lashon bara. The Hebrew word bara means, at least in one of its meanings, that something's being created out of absolute nothing. There is no other word in Hebrew that can be used. The word yotzar also means to create or form. Yotzar means you're going to form something out of something. You're going to form B out of A. You're going to make something out of pre-existing clay. That's a yetzira. When we talk about the word bara, the Hebrew word bara has the idea in it that something's being created out of nothing. That's the only Hebrew word. So if you find the word Bereishis bara, the Ribono Shel Olam is telling us that I'm going into the act of creating something from nothing. Ve'ein kol hanasa tachas hashemesh oy l'mayla hoiva min ha'ayin haschola rishona. Nothing that is made under the sun. We talked about this when we learned Ramchal. Ein kol chadash tachas hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything was either created and we see it, or some of it went extinct. Some of it is here in potential and will come, but ein kol chadash tachas hashemesh. There's nothing new that's going to be created. Initially comes into existence from nothingness. I'm going to read one or two more lines just to give us the idea of where the Ramban's going. Aval hotzi min ha'efes ha'gomur ha'muchla yisoy dak ma'oid ein b'mamish. Rather, God brought into being from complete, absolute nihility an exceedingly fine primary essence with practically no substance. But this essence is the potential for bringing forth other things, ready to receive form and to emerge from the potential to the actual. This primary substance called by the Greeks hiyuli. After God created the hiyuli from nothing, he didn't create anything anymore. The word bara is only appropriate for hiyuli because hiyuli came out of nothing. And the Hebrew word for something to come out of nothing is bara. And the only bara that occurred was hiyuli. Aval yotza v'asa. You can use the word yotzar, he formed, asa, he made. After the initial bara of hiyuli, God can form and do all kinds of things. For he brought all things into being from the hiyuli, endowed them with forms, and perfected them. We're going to move further into Ramban next week, how he reads the psukim, so that we get a chronological order, unlike Rashi. But here's his basic premise. God created out of absolute nihility. That's the Art Scroll word. Absolutely nothing. He created two hiyulis, two particles. These particles are dak. So the way that the Art Scroll explains that is it has practically no substance. There's something there. There once was nothing here, and now there's something here. This something is practically nothing. It's the first sub particle, whatever it is. And one particle is going to be called hiyuli heaven, and one particle is going to be called hiyuli earth. That's Bereishis Bora Elokim Eis Hashemayim Ve'eis Ha'aretz. In the beginning, chronological order. In the beginning, God created hiyuli shamayim and hiyuli aretz. The word shamayim means God created everything that was going to come and be shamayim. He created the potential for all that would be in the heaven, ve'eis ha'aretz, and he created the potential for everything that would be on the land or in the universe. And this particle this particle that contains in it all the potential for all Shemayim to come out of, and the potential for all of Oretz to come out, this particle is called Hiyul. Bereishis Bar Kim, in the beginning, God created. The first thing he created was Hiyuli Shemayim, from which he can then create the rest of Shemayim. The potential Shemayim was created. The Es Ha'aretz, and potential Oretz was created, from which he can create Oretz. After these two Hiyulis are created with the word, using the word Bora, that's the end of the word Bora here. What happens now is the world is now going to be formed, Yotzar, or Asa, made from those two Hiyulis. That's the end of Yesh Me'ayin. So when we talk about God created the world from nothing, people have a concept that the Baruch Shalom created the animals out of nothing. He created the sun and the moon out of nothing. When we talk about Yesh Me'ayin, many people think that it's a basic concept of Jewish belief, Yesh Me'ayin, and people have an understanding that the Yesh Me'ayin is, on day one, God created the light out of nothing. On day two, God created the Rakia out of nothing. On day three, God created the plants and the trees out of nothing. The Ramban disagrees with that. The Ramban says there's only two particles that are made out of nothing. Particle Shemayim, which has the full potential for all of Shemayim, and particle Oretz, which has the full potential for all of Oretz. And what happens now? Now, whatever happened to Shemayim happened to Shemayim. The Ramban says we don't know much about what was done with Hiyuli Shemayim. But Hiyuli Oretz, let's think about it. That's the mashal I give. It's not the best mashal because the Ramban says this particle it almost lacks substance. It is something, but it really doesn't have much substance. It's a sub particle. Let's make believe for a moment that this sub particle is some kind of like a Play-Doh. It is not. It's some kind of particle. But the Ribono Shel Olam creates this particle. Let's make believe for ourselves for a moment this particle is Play-Doh. That little piece of Play-Doh has the potential to be virtually anything except for it's so small. But from Play-Doh, you can make from Play-Doh a fire engine. Then you can take the Play-Doh and roll it back up in your hand and form with it a pizza pie. You can do anything you want with this piece of Play-Doh. You buy a Play-Doh set, you put the Play-Doh into this machine, you squeeze it, and then you have these discs that you put into the machine, and squares come out, circles come out. You can make challah with your Play-Doh. You can make a pizza with your Play-Doh. You can make cookies with your Play-Doh. You can make ice cream with your Play-Doh. In other words, the can of Play-Doh that we buy for our children, that can of Play-Doh contains the potential to be formed into maybe infinite variety of things. So let's move away now from Play-Doh and think of the particle. The Ribono Shel Olam created a particle that in it had the full potential to form all of heaven from the Hiyuli heaven and all the necessary items for Oretz from the Hiyuli Oretz. It had all the potential in there. So now we're already Pasuk 1 in chronological order according to the Ramban. Bereishis Bore Elokim, in the beginning God created. The very first thing he created, Es HaShamayim, Hiyuli Shamayim. And this particle will give forth, when God commands it, all of Shamayim, because it has in it the potential of all Shamayim. The Es HaOretz, and the Hiyuli particle for Oretz, which has the full potential for grass to come in, grass to come from it, light to come up, sun and moon to come from it, crocodiles to come from it, cockroaches to come from it. Everything can come from this Hiyuli particle. This is a Ramban that led many Rishonim to make some harsh comments about the Ramban in this particular instance. We don't like to use Greek words when we're trying to explain the Torah for reasons I'm sure everybody knows. But here the Ramban, in order to explain for the masses that he's writing to, the way they understood it was, as today, I tried to use a mashal of Play-Doh. We know that Play-Doh can be formed into so many different things. You just buy the can. You can't even imagine how many different things you can do with the Play-Doh in the can. So that's a modern day mashal. The Ramban in his day obviously found the word Hiyuli as a usable term for people to understand a tiny particle that has a vast amount of potential in it. So that is why the Ramban used that term. It will continue Bli Neder with the Ramban, but now we have two stark starkly different ways to understand the first pasuk in the Torah. Rashi says, I don't have a way to understand Bereishis Bara Elokim as meaning a chronological order. I have no way of doing that. So therefore, Bereishis is going to mean God created the heaven and the earth. Bereishis for the two Reishises, the Torah and the Jewish people, which is a drasha. And then Rashi says, if you want to use a pshat, you have to sort of convert the word bara into bria. In the beginning, not God created, but in the beginning, when God was in the act of creating heaven and earth, and this is what the place looked like, the first thing that happened at that point in time, but there were things that happened before that, including the water and fire as examples. The Ramban says, no, this is a chronological order. Bereishis Bara Elokim, in the beginning, God created Es HaShamayim, He Yuli, potential for all of heaven, the Es HaOretz, He Yuli, potential for all of earth. And then we're going to learn next week how the Ramban learns the second pasuk, which is a continuation of how the He Yuli was formed eventually into the earth that we know.